Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and today I want to talk about the horizontal Wargamer and exploring the third dimension. So today's video grows out of yet another conversation with friends where we were discussing previous game shows that we've been to and what our favourite tables were, what were the best games that we saw. And one of the themes that sort of came out of that was those games that break the mould in terms of creating depth, 3D depth on a table, really stand out. So, anything that uses height or variations in height on the battlefield really is visually impressive. And that certainly works for demo games. There's no reason why you couldn't put it into your regular games down your club or with your friends in your shed of war in your tiny operations room. And I wanted to have a brief discussion about why I think using the third dimension on a battlefield is actually really important to create visually enjoyable games. So basically, what it boils down to, as far as I'm concerned, is we are essentially descended from predators. We've got stereoscopic vision that gives us 3D images of what the world we're looking at, and so we like stuff to be 3D. And yes, we could use tokens on the games table, but there's something about us wargamers that really appreciates that 3D element of the game, miniatures on the table rather than tokens. But why does your game have to be limited to like the 1 inch area above the surface of your table? And indeed, why does that table have to be flat or indeed entirely horizontal? So I wanted to sort of discuss a few ways that you can increase the depth of that table, increase the height that's being used, as well as the width and the length of the table, to make a better looking game. Now, the easiest thing obviously that you can do is slap some hills and some buildings down on a table. Terrain in the form of hills and so on, we tend to think that just because the ground scale is shrunk, that the height scale should also be shrunk. Actually, I think sometimes stretching that scale, that height, to make hills taller looks better. Now obviously you have constraints there because you've got to be able to have models standing on them, so you can't have hills with slopes like that and nothing would stick to them. But that's where I think stepped hills comes in. We use them a lot in Postage Rejects games down the Shed of War. We'll use flat tops and step the hills, and yes, you're sacrificing a little bit of visual reality, but for playability, so that you can use those hills to put figures on. Another option, if you're playing a skirmish game, is just to make sure there's plenty of areas where you can put individual models if you're going to have skirmish across the hill. So an example would be this corner hill that I've made for my French Foreign Legion project. You'd never get a regular unit on a big square base to stay on here, but individual figures, there's plenty of spaces where I can put them. So I can use this hill for a skirmish game, and certainly for putting, it's taller than it probably would otherwise need to be, but I can get away with that because it's going to be for a skirmish game. But if you're able to put more height in, and of course you bear in mind that there are going to be some areas of terrain that are going to be impassable, so they can be as tall as you like. And again, to take another real world example, the Rejects put on a game at a local show back in November, and Richard, who organised it all, built some excellent terrain, including this really large hill in the corner. Troops were never going to climb up this hill, so it didn't matter that you couldn't put units on it, but he made the height extra tall, and so it gave a completely different dimension to the game. It gave a lot of depth to the table, and obviously you've got to put some great trees and so on, and it was a standout feature, even though it didn't actually feature in the fight. And there's going to be other pieces of terrain like that can be a lot taller than you would otherwise use. They may not be functional in terms of being able to move troops across them, but if that's fine for that piece of terrain, then go for it, make that as height as much as you can. You can also do the same with buildings. You can make the height larger than they need to be, because in most cases, particularly some scales, you're not going to be putting people inside the buildings. And in certain games that's not relevant either. So another thing that Richard did in his game is he used a scale that was the footprint was right for the size of the forces he was using, but the buildings are extra tall. But it made the town look a lot better. He also, what he did is he downgraded. He took a scale of buildings smaller than the ones that we had on the table. So we were using 28mm figures. I think he used 15mm buildings, but the buildings were elongated, very tall. And you know, in his artistic impression, you know, it is you know, you're using a license when you do that. But it looked really good because it added depth to the table. Now, another thing that we've done in previous games, again, another demo game, we've had balloons, observation balloons on the table. So again, they're extending high up above the table. Didn't really play much of a role in the game itself. It was sort of integral to the backstory of the demo that we were running. But really, the model could just as easily have not been on the table. But it added height and a little bit more interest to the table. And plenty of people were sort of saw the balloon, came over, had a look, and then ended up talking about the rest of the game. But there have been some excellent other examples at demos, demo games that I've seen at shows. So a 7TV game, I think it was, you know, spies racing down a mountain on skis, and this table was like at a really steep angle, and they used magnets to keep all the figures in place. An excellent way of taking that traditional flat horizontal table, changing the angle and making something much more visually interesting. And again, tons of games now you see aircraft on large, tall mounted sticks, so they're high above the action. You know, sometimes they're participating in the game that's taking place down on the table. Sometimes they're there just for the look of it. They don't necessarily have to be the same scale as the figures that are going on below, but they make for really interesting photographs, and I often try and take pictures with the aircraft and the battle in the background. But again, it just adds height to the table, adds a bit more of that third dimension, makes that overall demo table look really impressive. And again, there's no reason why you couldn't do that in your games at home. You know, why do we have to stick to that, you know, flat horizontal boring 2 inches, 1 or 2 inches on a horizontal surface? We can add a bit of depth, and it adds a little bit more excitement, particularly for that animal brain of ours that likes a little bit of 3D dimension. Another thing that I've seen used, very similar to the aircraft, is hanging fake clouds and things like that above a games table. Again, completely superfluous to the game, but it's about the visual image, and particularly in a demo game, that looks just really good. It's another way of stretching that table out and increasing the volume of the overall impression that you get. It's an artistic thing, maybe not for everyone, but something that I think you should consider if you're going to be running a really, you want a visually appealing demo game. So what I'm hoping, is just a few brief examples there, but what I'm hoping is that it's busting that old myth that Wargamers only ever do it on a level surface. There are other ways of doing it. You know, we have to add in terrain and buildings and possibly other things to add height. The playing surface itself doesn't necessarily need to be horizontal. You know, not all of us have access to sculptured terrain boards for rivers and valleys and so on, but you know, you can build up other areas, so there's other options. And as I've said, you know, adding that three-dimensional element to it can make for a much more visually appealing game. So as usual, I just wanted to end by saying, you know, do you have some brilliant examples? You know, share some pictures and comments of really good examples of using height to add that third dimension to games. What have you seen at demos, or indeed what have you run yourself? Maybe you've had some brilliant ideas. Love to hear them. Always good to share these sort of things, because hopefully other people that come across this video and read the comments will be able to run with some of those ideas and incorporate them in their own games. So as usual, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below or over on my blog, Big Lee's Miniature Adventures. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share, and of course if you want to get notifications whenever I post a new video, please click the bell notification icon. So until next week, look after yourself, get in as many games as you can, and of course keep rolling high.